Folks. So let's start with introducing the panel. Hope all of you are safe and healthy right now in these challenging times of shutdown. We'll begin with Bhavna. Bhavna.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hope you are all well. I'm Bhavna from batch of 2015. So post campus, I started my journey with Goldman Sachs in the investment banking division. I worked there in the healthcare EMEA sector. Moved on to the Government of India in a consulting role. I had 2 stints there, one with the Quality Council of India as a project manager, consulting 20 plus ministries on grievance analysis and technology, and a stint with the Prime Minister's office in their analysis and research unit. Post the Government of India stint, I moved into BCG to work on a supply chain and public policy case. Moved on from BCG to the MD's office at Future Group. Currently, I'm leading the MD's office for the consumer arm for Future Consumer. So that's my journey, and very happy to take you all through my experiences and learnings.
Thank you, Bhavna. We now have Jayesh Jagasia joining us. Over to you, Jayesh.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're logging in from. My name is Jayesh Jagasia. I'm class of 2008. I work with MSX International as an executive director. We work with leading automotive OEMs on everything related to retail performance and customer experience. I've been with the company for 10 years in the past. I have been an automotive industry entrepreneur. I've been a motoring journalist, and briefly, I've been a commodities trader as well. I'm very interested in how AI is changing our world and the world of business. So I produce and host a podcast called AI in Automotive. Feel free to look it up wherever you get your podcasts. I'm very happy to be here with you all today and looking forward to sharing some of my experiences.
Thank you, Jayesh. We now have Shashank Singh joining us.
Thanks, Pavithra. Hi, everyone. My name is Shashank Singh. I graduated from IIMK in 2014. After graduating, I started working in Citibank, where I worked in different roles in operations, risk, and relationship management. Post Citibank, I made a transition from corporate finance to sustainable finance at a conservation NGO called Worldwide Fund for Nature. My role at WWF is about working with financial institutions, including banks, including insurance companies, including asset managers, asset owners, and why environmental risks should be a part of mainstream investment and lending decisions. Post WWF, I'm now waiting to make another transition to the world of academics. I'll be starting my master's in public administration at Harvard Kennedy School in September this year. Very happy to be here. Very happy to share all my experiences with you and look forward to the interaction.
Okay, I'm Pavithra from PGP 08. I joined ANZ Village. That's where I started my career. After 4 years there, I joined HDFC Bank, and this was pre-joining IIMK. I turned down the campus offer at IIM. My offer was from Opwin Financials because it was an ops role. I joined HDFC Bank again in marketing. Within HDFC Bank, I moved across direct sales, retail branch banking, and premier banking. And in 2013, I left HDFC Bank and joined Reliance Broadcast, which is the radio channel 92.7 Big FM that you all have heard of. And in 2014, I had my kids, and that's when I quit Reliance. Now I have joined Kerala Startup Mission. I'm the senior fellow. I lead the initiatives on gender diversity and inclusion. So very happy to be here, and I'd just like to make a disclaimer at this point that all of us have made various career changes for various reasons. Unlike our previous seminars on finance and investment, we don't claim to be experts in our field and know it all. We are just sharing our experiences and what worked for us and what didn't work for us. Okay. What I'd like to know from you all is, beginning with Bhavna again, is you made changes after you got a dream placement on campus with Goldman Sachs as an investment banker. I think you asked 80% of the MBAs would have that as their dream job. So what and when made your change happen?
Thanks for the question, Pavithra, and I keep on getting this question. Definitely, Goldman Sachs was my dream job from campus. I have a very strong finance background, so it was a no-brainer for me. I interned there, a very meticulous, process-oriented place. Learned a lot there, but the development bug in me was very strong. I have a family which has bureaucrats there. I've always been bowed by the work they do. While at Goldman, I kept on talking to a lot of colleagues as to how to enter this development sector, how do I make moves there. So, post 1 year at Goldman, I started looking at a few opportunities in the sector. Some of the traditional ones being the UPSC or writing exams for railways or RBI, and also there were upcoming fields in the consulting segment of impact consulting or impact investing. At that point of time, this really amazing and interesting opportunity came up when a colleague of mine reached to me. The prior head of McKinsey India office was setting up this in-house consulting for the government of India, and it was very new. It was a new challenge. I went, spoke with people there. I attended a couple of meetings with the government of India, and I knew that this is going to be a very, very interesting and challenging role. And I took it up, and it happened to be a leap of faith, which turned out very well for me. So that was my first career move and very strong career move, I would say.
So it was an active interest in development that spurred this change.
Definitely.
Okay. Your experience in investment banking, was that challenging? Was that exciting? Or
it was very, very exciting, I would say. For a fresher, for someone who has the first job as an investment banker, it was a very exciting, challenging role. Working till 2 every night, working on decks which were so meticulous. Every number was cross-checked 5 times, I think. So it was very meticulous. I think it laid a very strong foundation for me in data analytics. But yeah, the structure has its own challenges. Someone like me who want to grow exponentially at the start of the career without following a streamlined path for career, I think I wanted to move on, and that was why I probably started looking out, and definitely in the development sector.
we'll move on to Jayesh.
So, where do I start? So, I've made sort of two major career switches so far. The first one was actually before I started my career. So, I'm actually a software engineer. Prior to my MBA, I got placed on campus with a software company. I worked there for a year. Didn't like it at all. I have always been I'm passionate about automobiles and a car fanatic of sorts. So I was a little bit of a misfit there. And I had really no standing to go and seek a job in the automotive industry. But I used to read a lot and I used to write a lot. So I, off chance hustled, wrote to a couple of car magazine editors saying I would love to work with you all. Here is wrote pretty unconventional emails that some may have laughed at, but it was the naivete of youth. Fortunately, those emails stood out, and those people got interested in speaking to me. So I had a couple of conversations and landed an offer with a magazine that was just starting up. They said, we need somebody like you to come and write for us. So I moved cities, moved to Pune, worked there for about a year. Figured that this is great, but like Bhavna said, quite impatient early on in my career. Wanted to do big things. So decided, there's only so much I'm going to be able to do here. The next step progression in this kind of organization is to be editor, and editors usually sit on their seats forever. So I said, I'm not going to be moving anywhere from here. So I decided to continue studying for my CAT, which I was doing while I was in my software job. I got to do IIMK, went through the MBA wanting to work in the automotive industry, interned with Tata Motors in the Middle East. Again, came out of it slightly disillusioned with the machinations of a large organization and a big corporate setup. So was fairly confused on what to do. There was a limited number of automotive industry options on campus at that time. So I said, you know what, I'll just do an interesting job and keep the passion for cars aside for a little while. So I ended up joining Olam International, did a management trainee stint with them in Vietnam for 6 months. Loved the company, absolutely fantastic company at that time, huge amount of responsibility very early on. But again, for numerous reasons, the pull of cars and automobiles was very strong. So I came back to Bombay, set up my own venture in the automotive industry. We set up a company called Vericar, which was India's first independent used car verification certification.
So you decided point blank that you wanted to become an entrepreneur.
I come from a business family, so that was certainly an advantage from that perspective. B, I was very fortunate in that at that age I didn't have too many liabilities or too many people depending on my income, so I had the privilege of taking those kind of risky decisions. And we were playing around with a couple of ideas amongst friends, and one of them seemed to have some potential and some traction. So we said, there's no way of finding out whether this works or not, rather than jump into it. And again, early on in your career, you're 25, 26 years old, you don't really have too many liabilities or monthly recurring burdens on your head. That's the time to sort of try out these things and experiment with a few things. So I don't know if you can call that a career switch, but I certainly jumped into the entrepreneurial startup journey way before running a startup was cool. We did that for about a year. Again, sort of a lot of soul searching, figured that we weren't scaling as quickly as we wanted to. Again, the impatience of wanting to do big things very quickly. We hadn't planned to spend 3 to 5 years building a venture. So we had limited traction, but not as much as we would have liked. So again, for numerous reasons, the both of us partners sat down and took a call that we'll place it on hold for a little while, and then we started to go back to our sort of more conventional careers. Then I went through a process of looking for the right opportunity, which I think we'll talk about a little later in the session today. But I ended up joining a very small company with about 60 people. Worked very well with the key team there. Managed to grow in the organization, grow the organization. Eventually, that company got acquired by a company that was 600 people strong, and then a few years down the line, that got acquired by a company that is 6,000 people strong. So I moved from, in 10 years, starting at a really small company to now working in a more conventional sort of large corporate setup. So again, I'll share some experiences from that journey as well. But that's basically been my sort of moves over the last 15 years or so.
So you've covered a lot in the last few years with the company that you joined after your entrepreneurial venture.
Yeah.
So have you been happy with the way it went?
I got very fortunate in the sense that I got in touch with the right people here in this organization who had the right value system and fulfilled all the commitments they made to me. So that was amazing. They gave me an opportunity to learn, make mistakes, learn from my mistakes, grow together. And all that was great. And I'm not saying that's the rule. I think that's more the exception. So in that sense, I really had a huge slice of luck finding the right people. And then, obviously along the way, you tend to get impatient sometimes. There's some self-doubt that creeps in when you look at peers, especially early on, who are doing far better than you are. And there's a little bit of self-doubt that creeps in, have you made the right decisions, etc. But through that process, I think it's important to know what really matters. And if what matters to you is working with people with the right intent and the right value system, then you just have to stay patient, dig your heels in, make sure that you wait for the good time to come, which again, I have been very fortunate to have made those decisions over the last 10 years here. So absolutely no complaints, no regrets. It has been a fantastic opportunity, huge amount of learning. I joined in a complete newbie, very green behind my ears, no idea about how business works really. And I think the amount of wisdom that this company and the people here have imparted to me in the last 10 years has been absolutely amazing. And I think that, you obviously have to have a huge slice of good fortune and luck, but you also have to kind of very quickly figure out, what matters to you and what you're willing to give up to stay close to what matters to you. And what mattered to me was working with smart people, doing something of consequence, very tangible, working with people with the right integrity and value system. And for that, early on, I was willing to make compromises in terms of my remuneration or in terms of the kind of work I did. And I think on balance, net, everything has worked out really, really well. So for that, I'm very thankful.
So it's a mix of being in the right place at the right time and having common interests, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Being in the right place, right time, being willing to hustle, being willing to sort of do the dirty work, put yourself out there, make yourself very vulnerable, you have to be willing to do all of that, which again, like we spoke, Pavithra, before, it's quite contextual. At some life phases, it's easier to do that. At some life phases, it's more challenging to do that. But I guess when it is reasonably easy to do it objectively, I think a lot of us are slightly apprehensive to make that leap, which I think through my process, I would always lay out, what's the worst that can happen? And in that worst case scenario, how bad can it get for me? And when you do that exercise objectively, at least in the early years of your career, when you don't have too many dependencies on you, you realize that actually, taking a risk is not that bad. And if it works out, the upside is pretty significant. So yes, there is luck, but you have to recognize when opportunity is knocking, and open the right door at the right time, I guess, and be willing to kind of fail, be willing for things to not work out, and then go back and start again. I think it's a combination of some of those things. And then just with this company, like while I have been here 10 years, so I'm probably not the right person to be talking about changing lanes on the fast track. But that this 10-year journey has been going through 2 acquisitions, and the organization has given me opportunities to live and work in different parts of the world, in different business functions, with a variety of clients and doing different kind of jobs. So in that sense, there have been some changes to the lanes, which again, through this discussion, I'm happy to share with you.
Thanks, Jayesh. Over to you, Shashank. You are also one of those who had a dream job. You got an offer from Citibank, which you took up, and you had a very exciting stint there. And then you moved to something very different with the World Wildlife Fund. So tell us about that, and how did that change happen? What was your thought process?
Yeah, thanks, Pavithra. So for me, the journey of where I am, and it's obviously not the culmination of the journey, but just one step along the way. But if I kind of connect the dots all over again, this is how I would put it. So when I was growing up, in the northern part of India, very close to the mountains. And nature for us, for my friends, myself, my family, it was not a summertime picnic or once in a 2 months sort of an outing. It was there all the time. So just this connect with the nature and the passion to conserve it, or the worry, to think about the unprecedented degradation of nature, comes from this background. From there on, for having this interest and pursuing it has been like a sort of an ongoing passion that I've had, and I've kept it ignited through different experiences while I've moved through the traditional stream of, like Jayesh, I'm an engineer as well, before I did my MBA. So these small experiences that I've had along the way have helped me learn about this issue of unsustainable development. Some of them being, when I was in engineering, I led India for what is called as the Youth Climate Summit. At that time, the voice of the young people on the issue of climate change, an issue which is expected to impact young people the most. I was a part of the campaign which mobilized about 250,000 youths across the world to deliver what was called as the Asks from Youth for the Conference of Parties that was being organized in Denmark. So it was a good introduction for me to be on the issue of climate change. After I completed my engineering and before I started my MBA, I also had the opportunity to work with this think tank called Center for Civil Society, which was probably the first and the most structured introduction that I had to policy and how policy could be fundamental in touching and improving lives of so many people. When I was at Center for Civil Society, I worked on this issue called APMC Act. So APMC is the act which determines how the agricultural produce across the country would be marketed. And the act essentially prohibits farmers from selling directly to the buyers. They have to do it through an APMC, what we know as mandi in our common lingo. So what I did was...
a very clear interest in nature and ecology and climate change. But once you got onto campus, you took up a finance banking role. And you told me you enjoyed it and you were interested and you learned a lot in that. So then what made you go back to climate and wildlife?
As I said, this is a cause that has stayed on with me as it, as what happens with something that you're interested in and passionate about. Even though I was not working directly on it, it was something that has stayed on with me. And when the opportunity came along, and interestingly, it came along through the strength of the IIMK Alumni Network. Sanket who's from the class of 2010 and actually works at WWF. And he was the one who posted this opportunity on the WWF email group. And that's when I saw it. And till that point of time, I'd be honest with you, I did not know what sustainable finance is. And when that came along, when that email hit up on my inbox, I wanted to look it up because it sounded interesting. And the idea of using finance as a sector, which probably is at the heart of our economic system, using finance as a leverage to influence change in the way we run our businesses, in the way the governments run, in the way the civil society operates, in the way the individual customers operate, in the way we design our households. So just having the unique power of finance sector to influence these changes sounded interesting to me. And as Jayesh said, it was not an easy decision for a lot of dimensions that you would imagine from the corporate to an NGO. But for me, it was also being at the right place at the right time. Personally, my wife was just moving to the US at the time. And, when I did the what is the worst that can happen to me analysis, it was a point of time when I could take the risk. I was all by myself. My wife is moving to the US. And probably if we were together at that point of time, I wouldn't have taken it. So there was an element of luck and the timing also that played its part in me making the decision.
Interesting that you mentioned the risk. So coming to my case, when I was with HDFC Bank, I had moved about 3 different business units in about 4 years. And that was when I was planning to start a family, and we had a discussion about how to cope with it. And fortunately, unfortunately, also had to move to Delhi with my husband being in the defense and getting posted there. So that was the right time when I thought it's a new place, it's a new geography, and my whatever I've learned in banking, I'd learned quite a bit. So maybe it's time to try something new and something that would also give me a little more time to myself. And that was when I got this offer from, or rather, the headhunter approached me and said that we have this role. Initially, I was taken aback. This was in media, and which didn't seem to have anything in common with banking. But what they liked about my resume was that there were a lot of processes that were followed in high net worth banking, the way we kept our relationships with our HNI customers. And they thought that could apply in media, in revenue and in sales as well. So that's how my transition to media happened. Uh, at this point, Bhavna, I'd like you to come in with, you made your change, you got the change that you wanted, you moved into development. But there was also a significant cultural difference, right? Government of India versus Goldman Sachs. So tell us a little more about that.
Sure, Pavithra. So, Government of India is a very different place to work, and I fortunately worked in 2 very different areas in Government of India as well. So, I would first probably set up how GS is, and most of the people here might know that it's very streamlined, very structured, very meritocratic. Everything is defined, process oriented. As you step out and as you move into the Government of India, the struggle with structure begins. Unstructured problem solving was the most which I did there for 2 years when I was there. That was the first big difference. The second difference I would say is that the kind of people I worked with, so you always have to be very careful about your ego. You have to build trust and credibility with the people you work with. You cannot consult people from the outside and accept that they'll agree to what you say. So that was another big mindset change, because we come from backgrounds wherein we are made to learn that you might be able to change the world. That's wrong. So when you enter the government, you realize that you have to build trust and credibility, and it takes a very long time to do that. So that was one very big difference for me. The third big difference I would say is that perfecting the analysis is not the job done. So it has many more steps. So you have to interact with stakeholders. You have to win stakeholders as the first step rather than perfecting your analysis. So that's something which was very different for me. I struggled with it initially, but obviously as you grow, you learn about the EQ and how things move. So moving things is a very different thing there. It was a different thing, very different culture. But I would give it to the place that at least they were very accepting of my solutions, my analysis, what I had to say. Another thing which I would probably highlight is getting your voice in a room, having a voice in the room. At the age and experience I had, it was quite tough to have a voice in the room. I used to get intimidated by all the bureaucrats, politicians, etc. But with time, I think you move over it. You have your champions around you who bat for you, field for you. So that was very helpful, helped me actually gain a lot of confidence, speak my mind better. So the culture was very different, but it helped me grow too much. So I would say that the going was tough, but it actually helped me move very quickly. And also, probably I would add a point here. So Quality Council of India, the structure was very different. I probably behaved like a partner there, who could take the shots, who could actually move a lot of things. But at the Prime Minister's office, I was an analyst. I was a very small fish, a very small fry in the whole game. I had to just stick to what was asked for me to do. So very different cultures, but very I would say times have changed and people are open to hearing what you have to say. So it was very different from Goldman, but very, very enriching and very challenging. So brilliant exposure and experience, I would say.
So different culture, but you learn to adjust, to adapt, to navigate. Now, if you could share a little bit about your move from government into back to the corporate world. You joined BCG, Boston Consulting Group, another
Yes,
dream company for many. So, how did
yes,
you go about doing this? Because once you get into government, you kind of lose your contacts with the corporate world, given how well entrenched you get into the government system. So, tell us a little bit about that.
definitely, Pavitra. What you said is absolutely correct. So after spending some time with the government of India, the kind of offers or what you say opportunities which start coming to you are very very topical, as to say. So it was more of think tanks reaching out to you, or again investment banks with an impact arm reaching out to you, or consulting with impact arms reaching out to you. So I actually so if I have to put why I changed, so I took a 2 month break after Government of India. I was getting married. I wanted to spend some time with my family. Working at Jio was very hectic. I was working 7 days a week. So I took 2 months off. I took some time off, and that's when I started to realize that I wanted to break out of this mold. I wanted to get back to the usual corporate strategies. That's something I wanted to actually get back to, gain more exposure and experience in structured problem solving. Uh, so I started applying directly to places which had these traits associated with them, some of them being the MBB. I applied to a few companies in the corporate strategy role. That's something I wish to pursue. So this is the time when I actually chased these places. I listed down all the opportunities. I remember I gave around 15 interviews. Obviously, I got rejected by a lot because of the kind of work I had done before wasn't fitting into the kind of roles they were seeking to. But I kept going, and BCG turned out to be so. The opportunity came from an IIM alum network only. I took it up. I went. I met the partners there. I understood what the role was. So it was a sunshine industry. It was supply chain. It was. It also had a hint of public sector, which aligned to what I had done for the last 2 years. So it somehow fit in. I gave interviews. I got in there, and yeah, it was a perfect opportunity for me at that point of time.
So
And
your priorities changed. Your at the life cycle, the stage of the life cycle that you were at changed. So you wanted something that gave you a little more structure, and hence you made the move, right?
something more focused, I would say. Government had a lot of width. I wanted to get into some more focus, some more structured problem solving. And I think uh, marriage again was a trigger. I had to make a switch. It was all perfect at that point of time. So I took it in.
Okay. Okay, folks, we are at the halfway mark now. And if you all want to support those affected by the COVID crisis, especially the migrant labor, please do consider contributing to our IIMK Alumni COVID Relief Fund. The link is in the description on YouTube. Okay, hope you all have been receiving the messages on your WhatsApp group. We are all safe at home, but please do spare a thought for those who don't know where their next meal is coming from or where the next paycheck is coming from. Right. Okay, Jayesh, I'd like to get your views on how you went about moving from being an entrepreneur. You had a very interesting way of going about it. So if you could share that with us in brief.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things that I want to share out of personal experience. So once we decided to suspend our venture and I decided to go back into a more conventional job, my sort of intuitive view was, oh, I'm a little desperate, so I'm okay with anything. And I quickly figured out, some friends advised me. I was applying everywhere, all over the place, casting the net wide, and did some thinking and figured that that's probably the laziest way of approaching this. So the laziest statement you can make is, "Arey, kuch bhi chalega. I'm okay with anything. I can do anything. I'm still at the beginning of my career." Actually, what you need to do, what I did, was actually sit down, open an Excel sheet, and listed down all the things I was good at, all the things I enjoyed doing, all the things I could do, and then try to create some kind of intersection which gave me a fairly good perspective of what kind of jobs so from a profile perspective, what kind of jobs I wanted to do. I was very clear I wanted to work in the automotive industry. So one dimension was clearly laid out. It needs to be automotive. I also figured out, based on my prior experiences, that I don't function very well in sort of large corporate environments. I'm quite impatient. My tolerance for BS is quite small. So I wanted to work in a small setup, very close to the founders or the leadership team. So then that was a second dimension that I kind of filtered out, saying I only want to work in organizations of a certain size, and I'm not going to apply to companies where I don't think I'm a good fit, and they don't think I'm a good fit, because I was giving a lot of interviews and appearing as a complete misfit, and it was very clear to them and to me that this is not a match worth pursuing. So once I had sort of filtered out some of those dimensions, what industry, what kind of organization, what kind of profile, I then concluded that actually the size of organization I want to work with, I'm the best place for me to start is to look for companies that have been recently funded. So this was 2000, I don't know, 9, 8, 9, and this was the time where venture funding and startup funding was just starting to gather momentum in India. So I went to the websites of a few, seed funds, venture capitalists, listed down their portfolio companies, filtered out the kinds of companies that I wanted to work for within my industry, doing something that I'm interested in solving for the world. And then I picked up those companies. I prioritized them into multiple buckets, going from priority 1 to priority 5. And then the interesting thing I did was I didn't reach out to them through their HR channel or through their careers page. Again, with due respect to HR, I think sending a generic email with your profile to careers@xyz.com doesn't really land up anywhere more often than not. What I did was I did found out who the CEO was or who the top person was, did some research on them, hustled and found their email ID either through contacts or often by figuring out what the email ID format of the company was and then guessing what their email ID might have been. And then I sent sort of personalized emails to these individuals saying, here is what I understand of what you do, here is what I have done, and then here is how I could contribute to your organization. Are you open for a chat? So again, there the positioning was not that I am a fresh graduate or a recently failed entrepreneur looking for a job. The whole positioning was, let's talk like equals. I've run a company, you run a company. Let's get together and have a coffee together and see if there's anything I can bring to the table. And I think that kind of positioning worked really well as well. So I wrote to, I think, 5 or 6 companies in my first priority. I got a response from, I think, 4 of them. I interviewed with 3 and I accepted an offer with 1. So that was the kind of process I went through. But that was 10 years back. Some of these things may still work, some of them might not. So you have to figure out what works for you. But I guess the takeaway is that you have to be ready to do a lot of introspection very honestly with yourself, and genuinely figure out what it is that interests you, excites you, and you're good at, and then just go with a very fine focus on. Now, you may want to still have some options, in which case my suggestion would be to repeat this exercise in 2 or 3 different domains or 2 or 3 different areas, and still have a very fine sort of deep focus, but now in 2 or 3 different industries, for instance. So you have a wider net of companies to speak to. But that's kind of the approach I took, and it, again, I've been fortunate, it worked really well for me. Of course, some emails bounced and some CEOs didn't reply, but that's fine. I mean, it's always going to happen. The fact that I sent out 6 emails and got 4 replies is just staggering success rate. I wouldn't have expected. So that's a little bit of what I did. What I have learned since then is that, that was when I was, 27 years old. I didn't need a lot of credibility behind me because my line was, well, I recently graduated. I have a couple of years of work experience. I've run my own venture for a year. But if I had to do that now, or if somebody with 10 or 12 years of experience had to do something like this, they'd obviously be expected to bring a certain amount of credibility to the table. Now, if you're thinking of switching industries or switching functions or getting into a completely new space, which is understandable and everybody should try and do it if that excites them. Again, my personal recommendation would be to do things that help build your credibility. So with me, for instance, I'm quite interested in AI, like I said, and how it might transform the way we do business. I did a short course on AI just to get familiar with the topic. And then I started this podcast. Now, starting a podcast, writing blog posts is all fail fast, fail cheap. Even if it doesn't work, it doesn't cost you anything. My podcast didn't cost me more than $100 to set up, more than a couple of weekends of work. I had a website up and running. I had a podcast up and running. And then that gives you the license to write to people as a cold email and say, this is what I do. Would you like to have a chat? And through that process of reaching out to people and trying to get them on my show and then having conversations on the show, it has taught me so much about this whole white space that I wasn't aware of, in spite of the fact that it has almost existential impact for my industry. So that's been a great experience. And I think it also adds a huge sort of dollop of credibility on top, right? Now, if I say I'm interested in AI, it's not an academic interest that I read a couple of books on the weekend for time pass, but it's actually seriously I've done something about it. Other ways that you could do it is, build an app if you have something experimental in mind, if it's a space you're wanting to explore, start a dummy company, do some digital marketing, get your hands dirty. I think that's the kind of thing that a lot of business leaders actually appreciate. So when you start to converse with them and seek opportunities, not through the HR channel, but directly through the business channel, it's stuff like this that they really appreciate, even if you don't have a lot of experience in their specific industry or function or technology, I guess.
Okay. Jayesh, what's interesting and what I noticed common across all 4 of us is that the power of the network comes through. So whether it was Shashank who had an alumni made from an alumni, Bhavna and her network, you made your network in the auto industry. Coming to me, it was something as simple as attending Sangam. Last year, I attended Sangam and Dr. Saji was there, and I went up to him and said, "Sir, I'm in Cochin." And even before the conversation could go to, so are there any fintech startups or are there any banking related startups? He said, "Okay." Saji sir, as usual, busy, and said, "Okay, you come and meet me in Cochin and we'll discuss." So I landed up there and I got an interview, and it was something very different from what I'd done earlier. I was still hoping that he would give me somebody's visiting card and say he's in the fintech space and you can contact him. That didn't happen. But 3 months down the line, I had an offer, and that was interesting. And it also gave me the flexibility with 2 small kids. I can work partially from home. It doesn't involve much traveling. So yes, the power of network and also having an active interest in the field that you're looking at. It's not enough to just keep reading links. So you have your LinkedIn. Either you create content, you put up your articles, or you follow what other thought leaders in the space are doing, and you learn from what's happening in similar sectors and see if that is applicable. So it's not a plain simple making an Excel sheet and then saying, okay, this is where I want to be, and sending your resumes out. There's a lot more work involved, and I really like what you did with not approaching HR. And working around HR, because we all know HR works in a silo and says, okay, this person has a sales profile. Do we have a sales opening? No. Okay, chuck it. That's
I mean, to be fair to them, HR's mandate typically is to find people for a certain number of opportunities that the business has provided them. Whereas often, if you speak to business guys, they may sometimes tend to take a very opportunistic view and say, I may not have something for this guy right now, but this is the kind of talent I shouldn't miss out on. So let me get him in and then we'll figure it out. And that generally HR doesn't have the flexibility to make calls of that nature. So I just want to call out a comment on our YouTube page from Yash, and he says your network is your net worth, to your point, and I think that's a pretty compelling 5 words there. So yeah.
Okay, Shashank. So tell us about your experience with WWF. What did you learn over there? What was it that Citibank helped you with in WWF? Though it sounds very disparate.
Yeah, at the risk of repeating a lot of what has already been said, I think some of us, some of the people who are viewing this probably would have worked with Citibank or would have experienced the brand in some way, and they would know that Citibank, my experience with Citibank, and I was a part of the management trainee program, what the program did was it moved us across functions. I do not have an extensively large amount of experience, but having that experience of moving across functions within the small period of time. So I started in operations, which is about learning, what are the papers that are coming in. So if a reimbursement is happening, or if a regulatory filing is being done on the behalf of the bank, what are those nuts and bolts? What are those minute details that those bankers are dealing with? And having exposure to those very small details, which may seem trivial, and you may frown upon the opportunity of doing that straight after your MBA, saying it's a clerical task. But for me, it was an opportunity to just have a very strong understanding of the process and how it is followed, how it is being done at that level. If a reimbursement is happening, or if a regulatory filing is there an echo? It is gone probably. Yeah.
You're
so
okay.
Having that opportunity to be able to start there and then move to the risk department, which is about understanding what probably the most important function of the bank is to underwrite risk. So how do you evaluate risk? How do you manage risk? How do you price risk? Having that exposure. And then I moved to the corporate relationship management, which is about working on the front line, as they call it in the banking industry. So working with the clients, interacting with the clients, getting sales into the bank, trying to grab competition wallet. So I think that experience of Citibank exposed me to a gamut of what is out there in the financial industry. Obviously, a very small portion of it, but at least in terms of the breadth of it, it was quite interesting. When I was making the switch from Citibank to WWF, one of the most important things for me to understand was what I'm getting into. What is the nature of the role? What does it involve? Because I was very clear, it was not that I was not happy with my job at Citibank. It was not that I was desperate to move. It was just that I was looking for a different experience. So it was not a decision in desperation. So I wanted to make a very informed choice. So, and that's where, Sanket helped me a lot, the supervisor, to-be supervisor at WWF. And I had these long conversations, and it was not a decision made in haste. For example, if it is working on sustainable finance, one question or one element that I really wanted to be sure about is, how do we do it? Is it just engaging corporates and having a metric which says that we engaged 50 corporates in India or 50 financial institutions in India? Or is it about going deeper than that? Is it about thinking to maybe a deeper question like, how do you build that business case? If you go to a financial institution, the first question he would ask is, why should I do it? Are we thinking on those lines? Is it building that research into the system? Is it contributing to the system by trying to answer this question? And when I spent that time trying to find answers to these questions, the way it turned out, and like Jayesh said earlier, I've also been fortunate to have supervisors, not just at Citibank, but at WWF, and a lot of places that I've been to, all of them were supportive. So when I tried to make that transition from Citibank to WWF, my supervisor at Citibank actually helped me make the transition. He said, look, you're interested in it. You want to go and take it up, do it by all means, and I'll be behind you. But just make sure that you understand the details of it before you make the transition. And in the same sense, my supervisor at WWF, when I had the questions about, what sort of scope or what sort of impact are we looking to have? What is the profile in terms of the day-to-day job? Those questions, I think I spent a fair bit of time understanding them and then made the transition. At WWF, my role has been what I just described. It has been very centered on research. I started with working on water risks in India and trying to answer the same question that I said earlier. Water risk is simply not about taps running dry in your home. It is about businesses not able to access water. It is then about banks who are lending to these businesses actually having impacts on their portfolios. So, the link is a bit indirect, but the link exists. So how do banks look at those risks? How do those links? How do they mitigate them? How do they mitigate water risks so that their clients do not get impacted and eventually their portfolios do not get impacted? So water risks has been one of the central elements of the work that I've done at WWF. Of late, I've also started working on sovereign lending, so which is the private and the public creditors actually lending to nations, and how we can use the power of creditors, which in this case is our sovereign debt purchasers. How do they work with the national governments, ministries of finance in their cases, to make sure that the environmental issues, the way these countries are handled in a fair manner, such that the environment is not destroyed at the sake of economic growth. These fundamentally has been at the risk of not going into too much details, has been what I've been doing at WWF.
Okay, Shashank, what I noticed was that you took your previous employer into confidence. Your boss at Citibank helped you in this. So I think it's important to not burn bridges, and not to be this, kind of, I don't care what happens and I'll go figure it out on my own. Your networks at your old workplace will always come back. The world is pretty small and it's pretty well connected these days. So what happened was, when I left HDFC Bank and moved to Delhi, I didn't know anyone in banking in HDFC Bank in Delhi, and so I thought, okay, that's it. I've moved into something else. It's not going to be relevant. But what I realized was that when I joined Kerala Startup Mission, one of my previous supervisors was was a very important investor in Kerala. So I had to get in touch with him again, and fortunately, he was my super boss when I was leaving. And in fact, he liked the way I was working right through my notice period. So since he realized I wasn't moving anywhere else immediately, he extended my notice period, and that helped me get a little more ESOPs than what I would have got otherwise. So it helps to be on good terms and not to be like, hey, I put in my papers, there's nothing you can do, you can't touch me, goodbye. So keep those relationships strong, leave on a cordial note, and you never know when those equations will, turn around and help you. Okay. The other thing that I want to touch on is all of us moved from something that paid very well to, you moved to WWF, Shashank, Bhavna, you moved to government, and Jayesh, you went from being an entrepreneur where you didn't have a salary. And I moved from banking, media paid well, but then into Kerala Startup Mission, which is government. And we all have compromised on our salaries. So how did you all negotiate that? Are you all at the stage where you all say money is not important? I know it's fairly important for everyone, but how did you all make that decision? Let's begin with you, Bhavna. So there was a salary cut, and then you went back to BCG. So did they try to play that off and say that, okay, this is what government paid you, and we'll give you a 10% hike on that, and be happy? Was that how it went, or you got a fair deal? And how did you get that fair deal?
Pavithra, I did take a very big pay cut when I joined the government of India, but that was thought through. I wanted to work with the government, and that's how the industry pays in the development sector. So I was aligned to that. But obviously, when you look for the next job switches, most of the recruiters would want to give you an X% raise over your previous salary, and that's what happened with me initially with most of the recruiters. But with BCG, once you explain your rationale as to why you worked, where you worked, and why you are moving now, negotiation does play a big role in getting you paid at the level your peers are being paid. So I had to negotiate, but BCG was fair enough with me in terms of salary post the government of India. So yeah, negotiation worked for me, and I was paid fairly at BCG. But I agree that most of the recruiters peg you at the previous job, and it is a tough task getting back to where you were.
Okay. Jayesh, what about you? You did something interesting on that as well.
Yeah, so I think in my case, it was slightly unconventional in that I wasn't switching from one corporate to another. So again, I realized pretty early on in the conversation process that if I approach this as a negotiation, then it's going to be a lose-lose, and everybody's going to come out of it quite unhappy. And that was in part sort of the person who hired me, who eventually became my mentor. him triggering off some of that thinking at 27 years old, I didn't have that kind of wisdom. So there are a couple of things we did. One, we kind of listed out with a 5-year horizon rather than what's your CTC for the year. We kind of listed out, in 5 years time, what do you want to be earning? And then let's see how do we get there, because there are multiple ways of getting there. You can start with a high base and do a sort of conventional corporate 10 to 12% increment, CPI linked or performance linked every year, or you make a slightly more entrepreneurial package where your base is much lower but your upside is much higher. And eventually that's kind of what worked for us, because the organization at that point was in a situation where they had a constraint on how much I could be paid fixed. And I was very happy at that point in my career to kind of explore some unconventional remuneration mechanisms. So obviously now in the last few years, with working for startups has become cool and fashionable. So everybody is kind of aware of sweat equity and or ESOPs and vesting over a period of time, etc. But there are a number of sort of innovative ways in which you can increase your upside even while you take a little bit less on the fixed component. Now again, this is quite contextual. What I would recommend is, if you're early in your career, start off by don't get emotionally attached to a number. Just because my peers are earning 18 lakh a year, I need to be at 18 lakh a year fixed is the wrong way to start, because that negotiation never goes well in my experience. Maybe with corporates it does, in my experience it doesn't. So the way I did it was, I'm 27 years of age, I live with my parents, I do this, that and the other. What really is my monthly outgo? And I listed that out. What do I need to live and survive comfortably without making any major changes to my lifestyle? And it came to a certain number, which was very, very comfortably surpassed, even with the little money that I was being paid. So I would live comfortably. I wouldn't have to worry about anything. I don't get attached to a certain number. And then we work out the 5-year upside with a variety of innovative ways. It could be ESOPs. It could be sweat equity. We worked out something called ghost equity in my incentive plan. So which was, I didn't physically own any equity in the company, but I, on contract, owned any benefit that somebody who owned that much equity would get. So in the event of, in a liquidation event or a acquisition event, I would benefit financially to the extent that somebody with that kind of. Now, again, this was a small company. The founder and the CEO had a lot of influence on how they could structure packages like this. If you are of a similar profile and getting into similar kind of space, then I would very much encourage that you explore a number of unconventional remuneration mechanisms, which have, I'm sure, now become quite popular, and leave the attachment to a specific number, because that is what is the first hurdle to cross. How am I going to tell myself that I earn 6 lakh rupees a year after graduating from IIMK? So I think it's important to lay out what your outgo realistically is, what you need to survive comfortably, and then get that on the table so that your day-to-day is out of the discussion, and then figure out how you can maximize your upside by doing these innovative things is some of the things I did.
You, Shashank, after a few years at WWF, so how did you make that decision? The salary cut was fine, okay, but now we're moving on to something else. So how does the next 7-8 years look like for you?
Yeah, just on the decision of the salary cut, I think it is a major decision to make. It is not an easy decision. There are a couple of things. I think what Jayesh said about having a time horizon as to, what do you want? Maybe, you're not running this race for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. You're running this race for much longer. So when you recognize that the time horizon is much larger, the perspective that you take on short-term gains or short-term losses completely changes. It happened in my case as well. The other thing that happened that helped me in my case was having a mentor, who you can discuss these sort of things with, and somebody who's ideally gone through a similar career transition, not probably exactly similar, but who understands what the situation is like to be in. And from the experiences that I've had on the sides while I was doing other things, one of the things that I really benefited from was having a network, which otherwise I wouldn't have had. Network, specifically people who work in sustainability, who work in finance, who understand what the sort of transition that I was making. And I was fortunate to have a mentor who had spent 35 years in the financial sector and then made the transition. which the interactions with this individual made it, easier to look in context of what the bigger things are and what lies ahead. In terms of the next steps for me and where it goes on, it was a decision also to think about how do I want to upskill from here. Doing a policy degree was, and it is also in part thanks to Ronald, who has been my mentor actually in a structural program at IIMK, and I had the opportunity to interact with him, and he's done a similar course. So I see the value for myself to do this course. As to what happens after I finish my education, it's not something that I have sight of right now, but I would definitely look for an opportunity which would keep me working in the field of climate change, nature loss, and linking it to the power of finance in addressing these issues.
Thanks, Shashank. Now, one of the questions that have come up is, does making too many changes early on look negative to employers, and how do you explain quick switches in an interview? So, Bhavna, you've had in a span of 5 years of work ex, you've had 4 changes. So, how have you dealt with that? Do you see that as a...
Please go ahead. Please complete it.
No, I said, so how did you deal with that? And was that a question that you asked yourself and saying, do I need to make these changes so soon?
So Pavithra, I'll probably answer this question in 2 parts. One was how the recruiters questioned me or used to look at me while questioning these switches, and the second was how I looked at these switches. So for me, when I passed out of IIMK, it was very clear that the first few years of my career are going to be learning oriented. I am not going to be very rational. Not rational. Rational is not the word, but very streamlined in making these choices. So that's what has kept me going in making these switches, changes. So the major levers I use are aspiration, probably my passions, and a couple of more things like how this would all add up to later what I would want to do. So this is what has kept me moving, and the switches have been incremental in what I would want to achieve in life. So for me, that's how I think about the switches. With respect to how recruiters look at these switches, definitely this question keeps on coming up as to why these many switches. We work with some of the best places, some of the best brands. So why do you switch so often? To which I think I'm able to answer it using my aspiration lever and also being at the right place at the right time. So these 2 things definitely work for me while answering these questions. Plus, over the years, your priorities change, and so answering this question becomes very easy. And plus, it's also very it's not that tough to answer this. Most of the recruiters now and also the people in the industry recognize how these switches add on to you exponentially. And a lot of people in the industry also recognize how much this adds on to your experience and exposure. And everyone's quite open to switches nowadays, is what I have seen in the past few months. And if you would talk to a lot of our alums, and I would quote Revant here, I spoke with him a while back, and the way he put together these changes was also amazing. He told me that in the industry now, switches don't count as switches, they count as experience and exposure. So you should be very proud of all these switches which you've made. And that's what makes it very easy while you're having a conversation with someone about these switches.
I agree. What you need is clarity in your mind as to what's driving you to make the switch. Even if it is for a higher pay package, as long as you're clear about it, and or if it is for something that you've always wanted to do and the right opportunity came, I think as long as you have clarity, you will handle the questions. But I'd like to get Jayesh also in on this. What do you think? How do you handle it?
So I think I'll share my view from the other side of the table, having recruited a lot of people in the last 10 odd years. I think there's no straight yes or no answer to it. Certainly, one as a recruiter or as an interviewer does not view it unfairly or unfavorably to start off with. And it's obviously an area that you'd like to dig deeper in and try and understand from the person, what compelled them to make those switches. And if they don't come across as trivial switches or, trivial changes just for the sake of it, I think it's fine. The important thing, at least for me, what has always worked is to be absolutely honest and extremely transparent in the interview. Know that the person sitting across the table will invariably be far more experienced and far wiser than you, so you can't get away with bullshit. So if you have made changes because you have not figured out what to do with your career at that point of time, then say it. If you made a change and that didn't work out for you because you landed up with a shitty boss or you were not a good fit for the company culturally, say it. If you thought the role was something else, but after joining you discovered it was something completely different and hence you want to move on, say it. It's important to be extremely transparent, extremely authentic in these conversations, because if you're not, the person across the table can figure it out very quickly, and then you're done. Then that interview is over. So I don't think, as a broad brush, you can say that these are viewed negatively. They are not. If you have made it to the discussion table and somebody has blocked out an hour in their diary to come speak to you, please rest assured that they will give you an opportunity to explain what's going on. And if you can explain that in a manner that is honest, transparent, authentic, then it will not be viewed unfavorably. At least I wouldn't from the other side of the table.
Another interesting question that's come up is, if you want to go back to a company whose offer you rejected, how would you restart the conversation? So this is a question from Chetna. Chetna, one thing I would say is it's important to not burn bridges, like I said earlier. So if you're rejecting the offer for the package doesn't suit you, or the location is not convenient, hopefully that was communicated clearly to HR or whoever you were talking with at that point in time. And if those circumstances have changed, then definitely you would have an advantage. So if you couldn't take up an offer because it was in a say in a Chennai and you wanted to be in Bombay, and you've moved closer to Chennai now, so then there's definitely nothing stopping you from starting the conversation. However, if it was say salary, then you need a very good reason for going back at a lower salary, and it would help if you know someone within that organization who can restart the conversation. Would anyone else here want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to say three things, if you don't mind. Number one, be extremely honest with yourself. If you want to go back to something that you rejected less than a couple of weeks back, then you have to first be very honest with yourself and know why you're doing it. Because if you're not doing it for the right reason and you're doing it out of some sense of desperation, it's not going to end well, number one. Number two, be honest with the person you're speaking to. So if you've made a mistake in your judgment and you want to go back and correct it, please be absolutely honest, be absolutely transparent. Don't try to bullshit your way through it. Don't try to talk your way through it. If you're honest and the person across the table does not appreciate it and it does not get the right kind of response, then it's not meant to be, and you probably should not be engaging with that kind of counterparty anyway. And number three, as far as possible, try and speak to the decision maker rather than the gatekeeper, because often the gatekeeper will view your coming back not favorably, and your case won't even reach the person who's supposed to make the decision, who might have actually wanted you to come on board and was willing to make a decision in your favor. So as far as possible, try and communicate and interact with the decision maker, the person who you will actually be working with or whose business you will actually contribute to. So again, if it's HR, then I'd suggest try and find a different channel to reach to the right people. I guess is the 3 points I want to make.
Anything you want to add, Shashank?
I think totally agree with Jayesh, and it is, again, as I was mentioning, it is about the relationships that you make with the people. So if there was a point of time where you had to make it out of a compulsion, I think when you're going back and having a conversation, you have to be dead honest as to what happened. Because if you're not, then either it gets figured out, or you kind of go back into the organization probably not even fulfilled, and there's a chance that what compelled you to go out in the first place may happen again. Right? So I think it is really important to have an honesty, like in every relationship, and once you do that, you may get a response which is not suitable, and you may still be rejected, which I think you have to take on your chin and move on. But if it does, then
Yeah, I think you have to start off going in fully expecting that you will be rejected, and if you don't get rejected, that's a bonus. So just keep yourself protected that way. And it doesn't always have to end well. If you go back and say, listen, I had almost accepted an offer from your competitor who was giving me an offer 20% higher than you are, but that's not working out anymore, and I'd like to come back and see if this is still open because I really connected with you all. If you did, it might just happen that they'd say, oh, really, our competitor was willing to pay you so much. Maybe, you know what, we'll match it so that you come on as a happy employee rather than treat us as a second choice and then come on board. So it doesn't always have to end badly, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
And one more thing I would have is that, a lot of these circumstances, and when you're dealing with your managers or the people you're having these conversations with, it's not the first time that they're seeing it, right? And a lot of these situations, they're rare, but they're not impossible, or it's not the first time that it is happening. So I think it is open to have that honesty and then see where it goes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Shashank. I think clarity within yourself and being honest and open is the key here. Okay. One more interesting question. How do you know you are stuck? Someone like me might be a self-made man, not fortunate to have a mentor. So I would say it begins with evaluating your strengths and weaknesses and analyzing your career so far. So what has worked for you and what has got you recognition or what has got you growth? Look at that, and also use your immediate supervisor and skip level supervisor, get their feedback. And ideally don't do this around appraisal time. You do it sometime when it's not that critical. So get their feedback and also talk to your peers. Talk to them and observe what they have done and what has worked for them, and whether you have those same skills. And if you have the same skills, then why are you not getting same opportunities? That is the way I would go about doing this.
Yeah, I think if I can chime in there, I think to Kaushik's question, I think there are now professional mentoring services that you might want to explore if you've not been fortunate enough to find a mentor in your professional life, and that often happens. There are now professional coaches who offer sort of professional coaching and professional mentoring for a fee that you might want to engage with and get on a sort of 3-month or 6-month or 12 sessions of discovery, and they can sort of bring their insights and experience from other people that they coach and counsel, and that might be sort of an area that you might want to explore.
Bhavna, would you want to add anything to this?
I believe what Jayesh said is absolutely correct. Mostly now, so I also happen to have a few mentors, but definitely paying for a mentorship service is one of the best things, best advice is what I believe. Also, I feel that you get to, so there are a few things which are very clear when you know that you are stuck. I think if that was the question, and that's how I read it, when do you know you are stuck? So I think it becomes very clear that you are stuck when you're not seeing growth in your learning curve, and it's not too difficult to find that place when you get stuck. So I think that's not the difficult part, but how do you get out of that, and how do you become very aware and start your discovery on that is the more important part. And mentorship is definitely the best thing which can happen, which can get you out.
Right. And also keep your eyes and ears open, to what's happening in the rest of the organization. So if you're in, say, credit analysis and you don't see your skills being utilized there, or you don't see much learning, you don't get much out of it, then see if there's some other unit where you can apply that. So look within the organization first, because it's always easier to make the transition within an organization. And here again, your personal brand comes in. So if you think that it's only your boss who's looking at you and your performance and what you bring to the table, there are a whole lot of other people who are also observing what's happening, either intentionally or unintentionally. So are you adding value to the unit? Are you adding value to the organization? So that helps. So open your eyes, broaden your horizons a little bit, and don't narrowly go by what is there as your KRA. That's
Pavithra, one more thing to what you just said. I think what has also worked for me is that I have a lot of conversations, so I don't miss a chance to have a conversation with people. And I think that's the biggest eye opener. You are on your toes all the time, so I make it a point that I have a conversation with a new person every week, and that really helps me stay on my toes. And you just find ways out like that. I think there's no straight path to finding a way, and I think talking to people is the best method to get out of where you are right now.
Absolutely, within the organization and outside. Agree
Absolutely.
with that. Okay. We've run out of time actually. We've overshot 1 hour. So I'd like to ask each one of you this. What advice would you give yourself if you could talk to the person you were in B school or just 2 years out of B school? Would you do something differently, or would you still take the same risks that you have? I'll begin with Shashank.
I think one advice, to the question of whether I would do something differently, I think a lot of it would be the same. The part about taking risks and the part about deciding to pursue something which did not seem mainstream, but it seemed a bit out of the way, but still deciding to pursue it. I think I would still do it again and again. I would still, one thing I would do more is to pursue experiences, pursue opportunities, pursue the conversations, as Bhavna said, which would help me grow which would grow my interests even further. Doing things on the side, building a personal credibility and building a personal brand for myself. At the end of it, learning more about the field, staying connected in the field, and building a network of individuals who have already been there, done that as to what I do. I think I would want to do more of that.
Okay. You, Jayesh?
So I think a couple of things. I think when at least I graduated from IIMK, and I think it applies to a lot of people. I think we graduate with a sense of entitlement and a chip on our shoulder that we are in some strange way special and some strange way different from everybody else, and hence we should be treated differently. And by extension, there are certain kinds of work that are beneath my dignity, and I don't want to be churning Excel sheets for 2 years. I think if I could go back and tell myself something, which thankfully I figured out pretty quickly, but I still lost a couple of years in the process, is that no job, as small and inconsequential as it may sound, is too small for you. If you can bring your wisdom and your expertise and your pedigree and your credibility to something as small as sweeping the floor, you have the opportunity. The reason you're being given that job, it may sound trivial to you, but the reason you are being given that job is that somebody wants to explore, if I put this extremely intelligent person in this job, can they create an orders of magnitude improvement? So if I'm asked to sweep the floor and I can create an order of magnitude improvement in that task, I think that's the kind of value that I want to be able to bring to any organization that I'm with. So there's no job, no profile, no task is beneath you. You're not terribly special. You're just a business school graduate at 26 years of age, earning a pretty fat salary and don't have really any knowledge or experience. I think my venture was quite cathartic in that sense that when you're out in the market, selling to the everyday guy, they don't care who you are beyond a point. And so it was cathartic in the sense that it really stripped us out, figuratively naked in front of the mirror to really see what you know, what you don't, who you really are. And I think that process is very valuable. If you can do something like that very early on in your career, try and start something, try and do something, that the process of learning and the process of reflection and introspection that comes out of it is, I think, extremely, extremely valuable. And then some of the points, obviously, Shashank already mentioned, but I think these are two things that I think would stand. We tend to often over-index our perception of risk and under-index our perception of opportunity. And I think that is also something that one must make a conscious effort to make sure that we are indexing it right. So right at the beginning, when I said, you lay out on an Excel sheet, what's the worst that could happen? And then what does it mean for you? Like, will you be on the road without a house and food to eat? Or is it not going to be that bad? I think that exercise is pretty useful in objectively laying out, what's the worst that could happen, but also objectively laying out, like, what's the best that could happen. And that often sort of clarifies a lot of decision making early on in your career.
Okay. Something interesting that you said, you brought up the analogy of sweeping the floor, and you said that forget that you're an MBA. My experience was a little different because when I moved to sales again, because my husband was transferred and I needed a role in Kerala. So the person that I spoke to, initially he was heading the direct sales. He was the national head of direct sales. So he said, go and meet the people who are doing something similar in Chennai and learn from them. So I literally went about it, like a school kid, so this is how he conducts his huddles, sales huddles, and this is how he sets targets and so on and so forth. And this is how he monitors the team. And what I realized 5 months, 6 months down the line was that I was doing exactly what someone who started his career as a sales executive in an FMCG company was doing. So someone joined as a sales executive and he moved up, and 10 years later he was an area head, or 15 years later he was an area head. And here I'm coming into sales as an area head and I'm taking the same approach. So what value add is my MBA bringing to this role and to the organization? So that's when I started becoming a little more analytical and seeing, which are the geographies where the most accounts were being opened and what was the profile of customers opening those accounts. And if there's a similar profile of customers, say if most accounts were being opened in Trivandrum, do we have a similar profile in Cochin whom we are not tapping, or do we have someone in Calicut whom we are not approaching, and so on? And that was the value add that I had to bring in to this role and to the organization, instead of just being cookie cutter, like, okay, this is what my predecessors did and this is what I'm going to be doing. So that was what I would do differently. Be open and don't go with the straight and narrow approach of this is how the role has been done all these years and this is how it needs to be done. Anything you would like to add, Bhavna? We just have, I think, about 5 minutes more.
So I think I absolutely 100% agree with Jayesh, Shashank, and you just said. I'll probably add one more thing. What I've learned, or probably what I would tell myself, probably a 25-year-old me would be less fearful and ask for more. So I think we constantly undermine ourselves and probably settle for much less than what we can do. So I would definitely have been much less fearful if I would have had to do the journey again. Ask for much more through my role, spend each day working more probably on things which I would want to work more. So being fearless is something I've learned over the time, and probably that's some advice I would give. And the second thing would be enjoy each day. So probably I have had some anxious days, and I think none of that anxious days were probably adding up to where I am right now. So anxiousness is something I would definitely avoid. And these are the two things which probably I've learned, and they keep me going now.
Okay. Thanks, Bhavna. Shashank, there's a specific question on sustainable finance. Could you take that, please?
Yeah. So to the question is, do roles in sustainable finance require very different skills than other finance roles? What are those? So being in finance roles require you to be making investment and lending decisions, right? Investment if you're on the investment side, and lending if you're on the banking side. Being in sustainable finance, being on the other side of the table and engaging with those financial institutions who are making these decisions, and making a case for why environmental risks, which are currently in the financial and economic models, for those of you who are in finance, are considered as externalities, right? They're considered to be external to the financial and economic systems. But as a lot of us know, what is happening with our climate and what is happening with our nature is not external to the system. It is the system, right? So these should be part of investment lending decisions. So to your question, it does require skills in research, for example, to be having answers to the questions of why should financial institutions start caring about climate change and nature loss. It is not a very straightforward link, right? So how climate impacts the portfolios of financial institutions. So if you're a BlackRock, if you're Larry Fink, why you should care about hurricanes on the east coast of the US, or if you're the CEO of a reinsurance company, how all the ultimate insurance liabilities sit on your balance sheet. These are questions which there are limited answers to. So you have to contribute in getting those answers to. And research is obviously one way to do that. The second skill that you would need to have is to engage with these financial institutions. That would involve different sorts of engagement. It would involve communication. It would involve outreach. At some stage, it also requires activism, right? When your voice is not being heard, There are organizations like Share Action and Banktrack, where Greenpeace, for example, is a classic case. They do research, they do communication, they do outreach, but when none of this works, they would put boulders outside the offices of HSBC in London, which also seems to work, right? So there are these skills that are different that are required. But what I would say is, having skills in finance, and if you're in the mainstream finance, you already have skills that are needed on the other side of the table. You understand how the system works. You understand how these investment and the lending decisions that we want to influence are taken. And that understanding, that experience, that knowledge is very valuable. So I wouldn't worry about acquiring lots of additional skills to be successful in that role. If you're in the mainstream finance and if you're interested in sustainability, I think you would have it to be successful in this role.
Okay, thanks, Shashank. Jayesh, there's something about how do you assess how well a business is doing. Could you read out that question and answer it, please?
So the question is, how do you assess? Well, let me just read out Anchit's question straight away so that we have it verbatim. When you look at high upside packages, you need to be more certain on the business plan or how the organization is being run. That in some ways reduces the options. How do you deal with that? So, yeah, absolutely. I think, so one thing is to know that you're not going to know everything. You're not going to have the ability to look at a lot of data and evaluate whether this is going to be a successful organization business plan or not. So I think parts of the decision are just heuristics and, how the people you interact with make you feel. Are you seeing some signs that leap out at you that say that they may not be being genuine or they may not be being authentic with you? And those are signs to watch out for in the absence of hard data. But like I said, and I've been repeating this all through, just evaluate, even if it goes belly up, what's the worst that could happen to you? And now if you're 15 years into your career, you have pretty significant liabilities, you have a couple of kids, and you can't take sort of these blips to your income, then your risk appetite is far lower, and then you'd probably not jump in straight away. But pretty early on in your career, what difference does it make? You'd get in. I can guarantee you that regardless of whether the company works or not, whether it succeeds or goes bankrupt, you will get to learn personally a tremendous amount that you will be able to put to use later in your career that will be worth its weight in gold. So I would say early in your career, don't worry too much about all of this. Even if it goes wrong, you won't be on the road. Unless that's the case, then you don't do it. A little later on in your career, some of us have a pretty decent corpus saved up because they know at some point of time in their career they're going to take a decision like this, and they may be building up a corpus of a year's worth of salary in case they don't have an income. If you have that kind of corpus and you're willing to use it, again, jump in. You will not have all the data to make an informed decision. Use your gut, use your instinct, watch out for heuristics, and take a call. Late in your career, if you are at a point where you don't have the corpus, you don't have the financial cushion, you have pretty significant liabilities, then obviously, if you are in a position, depending on the kind of company you're dealing with, that you have the ability to do the due diligence, do it. If you don't, then you don't make that risky decision, I guess, is some of the things I'd like to say.
Okay, we are right at the end, but there's one question. I think it's the elephant in the room that we've all ignored for all through. So how do you look for roles in the current situation? I would just say I'm not a risk taker. So I will say sit tight, observe what's going on, hold on to the job that you have in hand, do your job well, be nice to your boss, be nice to your peers, and hope for the best. But meanwhile, keep looking at the sectors which are going to be doing well. There are going to be pharma companies. There are going to be healthcare companies that are going to be in demand. Healthcare services that are going to be in demand. China, or rather, the backlash against China is another opportunity that's opening up. So just keep your eyes and ears open while continuing to do what you're doing right now very, very, very well. That would be my piece of advice.
I think I'd like to chime in here. So again, three very specific things. One, build and supplement your skills with things that you are maybe not familiar with, or areas of technology or industry that you don't have exposure to. This is the golden age of content. There is content from the best universities available for free. Yesterday, I got some messages that the world's most expensive textbooks are now available for free. So please make use of that and build your skill. To build your credibility, do things that, 6 months down the line, put you in a position where you can say with authority that I am an industry voice on so and so. And it could be a narrow intersection of 4 or 5 different things. And you may be the only person in the world, or one of the few people in the world, who might be able to say with a lot of authority that I have expertise in the intersection of these 4 areas. So two, build your credibility. And 3, again, I think this is the golden age of experimenting with ventures. You can get a website up and running in no time. You can get a digital marketing campaign up and running in no time. It doesn't cost a lot of money. So if you have even a sort of germ of an idea in your mind that's not fully formed, just go out there, try something, experiment. To do that, you don't have to quit your job. You don't have to stop your income. I just do one of these or all of these 3 things, and I think it'll serve you really well.
Okay, Shashank, would you want to add? What are your views on what to do in the current situation?
I think I would approach it the way I would approach it in any other situation. I would think about what is the motive of the change. Why do I want to make the change? I would approach my network. I would get a good sense of where those opportunities are. As you said, I would also be a bit cautious because these are not normal times. The blind leap of faith that we mentioned that we would take otherwise. Not all decision making is science, right? So there is a science part to decision making. There's also the leap of faith that you take. The capacity to take that leap of faith may be a bit down in this moment. So I would be cautious of that. But in terms of scouting for opportunities, in terms of being in touch with my network, in terms of, as Jayesh said, constantly updating my skills and using the opportunity right now, which is making a lot of content free, I would do it like the way I would do it in any other time.
Okay. Bhavna? And Bhavna, while you're covering how to handle the current situation and looking for roles, could you also cover a bit on personal branding?
Definitely. So probably I'll take the first part first as to how do we approach the current situation. I believe that what Jayesh said is bang on. Since the times are down, I think it's time to invest in ourselves. I would probably wait for the times to rise to leave or go somewhere and probably be around places which need me right now the most. So that's something I would definitely do, build myself up, invest in myself, and definitely keep talking to people, scouting for roles, but stick around, learn, and invest in myself. And there are sectors which are definitely upcoming, including edtech or healthcare, pharma, and I think that's going to really boom. So that's one thing. On personal brand building, I would definitely like to act. What we are is what we project. So both on our resume and how we sell ourselves is very important. Storytelling is something, with complete honesty, of course, as Jayesh had mentioned, storytelling is one of the most important things which has helped me get where I am. So linking whatever I've done, given all my stints have been very diverse. So putting all the dots together, creating a proper narrative is something which is very, very important, along with transparency, honesty. And we really need to invest a lot of time in that. And the more conversations we have, the more clarity comes out of that. So that is for my personal self, but definitely having a perfect LinkedIn account, having a blog or a website is something I would definitely recommend for someone at this point of time, given how connected we are, and that's supremely important in these times. And that shows your passion, that shows your interest, that you're willing to go out of your way to do something new. So these are a few points I would make.
Okay. Jayesh, you'd like to add on personal brand? We covered a bit of it, but if there's anything new you'd like to add.
Yeah, no, I think it goes back to brand and credibility. So, there are numerous things you can do today. It does not have to be a blogspot blog that, 3 people read a year. I think there's numerous things you can do to leverage the power of social media. You can just create an account on Twitter, start following interesting accounts that are operating in the space that you want to build some credibility in. Even starting with just simple retweets with a little comment in the front of what your perspective is, I think goes a long way to build your brand, and then explore sort of new age media like Medium posts and podcasts and whatnot. Again, all of this is easy to set up, doesn't cost any money. It's fail fast, fail cheap. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Just put it aside, do something else. And I think that plays a huge role in building your personal brand credibility.
Shashank, your views?
Yeah. Very, very quickly, I would say that one. I would say that, and I've said this earlier as well. Look out for skills. Look out for experiences. Look out for people that you can speak to. That having an interest in something is great, but if you can back it up with skills, with experiences, with networks, that really helps build that experience or build that interest into something tangible. And the second thing that I would say is that when you're thinking about building a brand, do not think about what you're doing right now as a negative. So in my experience, what I did before coming to WWF, it is not that if I would have done it for 3 more years, that would have set me back in my quest to work in the field of sustainable finance. So brand building is not essentially about always trying to kind of questioning your current state. Remember, there are certain career states which would value a corporate experience. For example, if you want to be coming into the space of sustainability, working with corporates, the amount of time that you've spent with those corporates themselves, understanding the system, it actually works to your advantage. It actually helps you build the brand. So do not underestimate the value of that experience.
Right. Thank you all so much, Bhavna, Jayesh, and Shashank, for joining me. I've had a great time. I've learned so much. This is not just CP talk that I'm doing. I've learned from each one of you. And thank you all. The audience has been fairly appreciative. If you will have more questions, then you all can send it to us. You all can connect with us one-to-one. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Shiva, for putting this together. And do keep in mind the COVID relief. Please consider those who are not as fortunate as us and make a contribution if you can. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shiva, for organizing.
Thanks, Pavithra.
Cheers.